She came to his door at 11 at night with no shoes on, no phone, no bag, just a thin jacket soaked through, and a cut on her forearm she kept trying to hide by crossing her arms. His name was Ben Hartley. He was a carpenter who lived at the edge of a small town, made furniture for a living, and had never once in his life been involved in anything that would make a headline. He gave her a pair of dry socks and a bowl of soup, and let her sleep on the couch in his workshop because it had a lock on the inside, and he figured that mattered to her more than anything else he could offer. He did not ask who she was. She did not tell him, and for 2 weeks, that arrangement worked just fine. Then the black cars came. Not police, not family in the normal sense. A fleet of 6 private security vehicles that rolled through the streets of Millbrook at 7 in the morning like they owned the road because the man who sent them pretty much owned everything else. And when they stopped outside Ben Hartley's workshop and the door opened, and a man in a gray suit stepped out with a photograph in his hand, a photograph of a girl with tired eyes who had shown up at Ben's door with no shoes. Ben understood that the quiet arrangement he'd made with a gray, frightened teenager had just become the most complicated thing that had ever happened to him. He had no idea it was also about to become the best. Stay with me. This one is worth it. Real quick, you're watching this without subscribing, which is completely fine, but it costs nothing and takes 2 seconds. Hit that button and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I want to know. Now, let's go. Ben Hartley was 34 years old and had been building things with his hands since he was 12. Not because someone told him he should, because it was the one thing that made immediate, uncomplicated sense to him in a life that had occasionally been short on that quality. You took wood. You shaped it. You made something that hadn't existed before. The logic of it was clean, and the results were honest. And Ben had always had more use for honest results than for complicated theories. He ran a one-man workshop at the edge of Millbrook, a town of about 8,000 people in the kind of county where everyone eventually knew your name, your car, and roughly what you earned. He made custom furniture, dining tables, bookshelves, bed frames, cabinets, the kind of work that took patience and produced things that lasted longer than the person who commissioned them. He was not rich. He was not struggling. He was the specific category of financially stable that people who are financially stable rarely think about. It was just enough to live well, sleep well, and not spend a lot of energy worrying about tomorrow. He lived in a small house attached to the workshop. The house had 3 rooms, a kitchen that smelled permanently of coffee and sawdust, and a back porch where he ate breakfast most mornings, watching the light come through the tree line. He had no children. He had been engaged once, a woman named Rachel, who was warm and funny and had eventually realized she wanted a life with more noise in it than Ben's particular version of quiet could offer. They had parted without bitterness and still sent each other brief messages on birthdays. Ben did not consider himself lonely exactly. He considered himself calibrated. His closest friend was a man named Paul, who ran the hardware store 2 blocks from the workshop and had been in Ben's orbit since 7th grade. Paul talked enough for both of them, which was an arrangement that had worked reliably for 22 years. That was the entirety of Ben Hartley's world on the night a girl showed up at his door. Her name was Lily Mercer. She was 15 years old. She had straight, dark hair that had come loose from whatever it had been tied in, and brown eyes that moved around a room the way the eyes of someone move when they've been taught by experience to identify exits before they identify anything else. The cut on her forearm was not deep. He saw that when she accepted the first aid kit, he quietly placed on the workbench near her without comment. She cleaned it herself without asking for help, which told him something. What Lily was, though Ben didn't know any of this yet, was the only daughter of Richard Mercer. And Richard Mercer was, there was no gentle way to frame it, one of the wealthiest private individuals in the country. Manufacturing, real estate, infrastructure, investment. A man whose name appeared in financial publications with the regularity of a weather forecast, and whose decisions moved things, markets, projects, sometimes entire towns, in ways that most people only felt without understanding why. Richard had been away on an extended business trip for 8 weeks. It had taken him abroad, across 4 countries, through the kind of deal-making that required his physical presence in rooms where phones were not permitted, and the stakes were large enough that distraction was genuinely dangerous. He had left his household in the care of his wife. His second wife. Her name was Diane Mercer, née Ashford, 41 years old, elegant, precise, and in possession of the particular quality that very controlled people sometimes carry, a surface so smooth and well-managed that most people who encountered her came away feeling they'd met someone exceptional, without being able to name what it was they'd actually seen. What they'd actually seen was management, professional, continuous, exhaustive management of every impression she made. Lily was Richard's daughter from his first marriage. His first wife, Caroline, had died when Lily was 7, a brief illness, swift and terrible. And Richard had never entirely come back from it in the private way that people don't entirely come back from certain losses. He had rebuilt everything public-facing. The company, the social presence, eventually, after 3 years, a second marriage. But something in the deeper rooms had remained shut. Diane had understood this about Richard before she married him. She was a perceptive woman. She had also understood that Lily, serious, quiet Lily, who looked exactly like Caroline and reminded Richard of exactly what he'd lost every time he looked at her, was the part of the household she would never fully control. She had, accordingly, been working on that problem. Not with cruelty anyone could point to directly. Not with anything that left marks. With a particular technique of someone who understood that sustained small pressures, applied consistently over time, accomplished more than outright conflict. Lily's friends became difficult to see. Lily's phone developed restrictions. Lily's schedule filled with activities Diane approved and emptied of the ones she didn't. Lily's opinions at dinner were corrected not harshly, patiently, the way you correct a child who doesn't know better. And when Richard traveled, the corrections became less patient. The night Lily left, Diane had told her in a voice that could have been discussing the weather that her father had given Diane full authority over the household in his absence. That Lily's behavior had been disappointing. That the room Lily used would be given to Diane's visiting niece for the remainder of Richard's trip. That Lily would be moved to the staff quarters at the back of the estate until she demonstrated the maturity to deserve better. Lily had listened. She had nodded. She had gone to her room, the one with her mother's photograph on the dresser, and packed nothing, because she understood that if she packed, someone would see her. She had simply walked out a side door in the garden at 10:30 at night, crossed the estate grounds, found a gap in the perimeter hedge she had known about since she was 11, and started walking. She had walked for 40 minutes before she saw the light in Ben Hartley's workshop window. Ben asked her one question the first night. "Are you safe?" She said, "From the person I left, yes." He nodded. He didn't press. He showed her where the bathroom was, put a blanket on the workshop couch, told her the door had a bolt on the inside that worked, and went back to his house. In the morning, there was coffee on the workbench and toast wrapped in a kitchen towel. She ate it alone. He was already working, the sound of sanding coming through from the other side of the workshop, steady and unhurried, not hovering, not performing normalcy. Just working because there was work to do, and that was what the morning was. She came to the workshop doorway at 8:30 and watched him for a while. "Can I help?" she said. He looked up, considered her question without dismissing it. "Can you sand?" "I don't know. I'll show you." And that was how Lily Mercer, who had grown up in a house where every hour was arranged and every activity had a designated purpose and an expected outcome, spent her first full day learning to sand the surface of an oak dining table that Ben was making for a family in the next town over. She wasn't good at it at first. She pressed too hard in some places, too light in others. Ben corrected her without making it a correction. He just moved her hand slightly and showed her the grain and said, "Feel it, don't fight it." And she understood what he meant in a way she wouldn't have been able to explain. By afternoon, the rhythm of it had gotten into her and she stopped thinking and just sanded. That evening, Paul came by. Paul was the kind of person who filled a room by arriving loud, cheerful, entirely without guile. The human equivalent of a reliable weather system. He stopped in the workshop doorway, looked at Ben, looked at the girl, looked back at Ben with an expression that was 40% curiosity and 60% delight. "Didn't know you had company," he said. "This is Lily," Ben said, without elaboration. Paul introduced himself, shook her hand with genuine warmth, and did not ask a single follow-up question, which Lily would later say was one of the most considerate things anyone had ever done for her. He stayed for 30 minutes, talked about a hardware delivery that had come in wrong, told a story about a customer that made Ben almost smile and made Lily actually smile, and left with the easy naturalness of someone who understood that his job in a given moment was sometimes just to be present and uncomplicated. After he left, Lily said, "He's nice." "He's the best person I know," Ben said, which is saying something because he talks too much. She laughed. It was small and quick, like something that surprised her coming out. She had not laughed in a long time. The days developed a shape. Morning coffee. Work in the workshop Ben building. Lily helping where she could or watching where she couldn't. Learning the names of tools without being quizzed on them. Understanding the logic of a joint. The patience required for a finish. Afternoon, Ben would take a job delivery or meet a client, and Lily would read. He had a shelf of paperbacks in the house that she worked through steadily. The way someone eats when they've been hungry longer than they'd like to admit. Evenings were quiet. Ben made dinner, simple food, nothing elaborate, the kind of cooking that filled a kitchen with warmth without requiring anyone to comment on it. They ate at the workbench because the kitchen table was currently occupied by a project. They talked a little, not about anything that required trust yet, about the wood, about the books she was reading. 1. About Paul's gift for acquiring wrong delivery orders. She did not tell him her last name. He did not ask. But on the fourth evening, she told him about her mother, not Diane, her real mother, Caroline. She said, "She used to make this particular kind of tea. I don't even know what was in it, chamomile, and something else. She'd make it whenever I was upset about something at school, and we'd sit at the kitchen table, and she'd ask me questions, but not the kind of questions where she already knew the answer she wanted. Actually curious questions." She looked at the grain of the workbench. "I can't remember the taste anymore. I've been trying to remember it for a while." Ben was quiet for a moment. Then he got up and put the kettle on. He came back with 2 mugs, chamomile tea, because that was what was in the cupboard. He set one in front of her, without comment. She wrapped both hands around it, didn't drink it right away, just held it. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once and picked up his own mug. On the 7th day, the first man came. He drove a black sedan with tinted windows and parked outside the workshop for 45 minutes without getting out. Ben noticed it through the window while he was working. He did not say anything to Lily, but he positioned himself near the window where he could see the car. After 45 minutes, it left. That evening he said, "Lily, I'm not going to pressure you, but if there's something coming toward you, I'd rather know what direction." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My father is away on a business trip. He'll be back in about 3 weeks. There are people who work for my stepmother. She doesn't want him to find out I left." Ben absorbed this. "Because if he finds out you left, he finds out why." She looked at him. "Yes. Is your father a good man?" She thought about it carefully. "He used to be. Before she... Yes, I think so. Underneath everything, I think he's lost." Ben turned this over. "Okay," he said. 3 weeks. I know this is 3 weeks," he said again, simply. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a commitment. And Lily, who had spent 8 months watching Diane negotiate everything into a shape that served Diane, recognized the difference immediately. She pressed her lips together hard. She didn't cry, but it was close. You're watching, appreciate that. If you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. No pressure, no big ask. It's free. And drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? I genuinely want to know. Now, back to the story. On the 14th day, the cars came. 6 of them. Private security, not police. They rolled through Millbrook in the early morning before most of the town was fully awake. They knew the address. Lily understood immediately when she saw them from the workshop window that someone had been thorough. Ben had already seen them. He was standing at the workshop door, coffee in hand, watching them park with the expression of a man who had anticipated something and was now simply confirming his prediction. Lily appeared beside him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'll go." "You're not going anywhere," he said, in exactly the same tone he'd said 3 weeks. Flat and complete. The man who stepped out of the lead car was named Victor Diane's head of household security, impeccably dressed, with the practiced blankness of someone paid to have no visible emotional responses. He walked to Ben's door. Ben opened it before Victor could knock. "Can I help you?" Victor looked past him into the workshop. His eyes found Lily. "Miss Mercer," he said, "your stepmother has been extremely concerned. We're here to bring you home." "I'm staying here," Lily said. Her voice was steady. Steadier than she had expected it to be. Victor redirected his attention to Ben with the particular expression of someone who is deciding how much pressure to apply and in what sequence. "Sir, I'd encourage you to consider your position carefully. The young woman is 15 and a minor. The family has resources." "I understand that," Ben said. "She's told me she doesn't want to go with you. She's not under any obligation to. She is a minor in the care of her legal guardian is her father," Lily said from behind Ben. "Not Diane. My father's name is on every legal document. Diane's authority extends to household management, not to custody. I know because I read the documents." A pause. Victor had not expected this. Whatever model he'd been running of this conversation had not included a 15-year-old citing legal documents with calm precision. "Miss Mercer, I'll speak with my father when he returns," Lily said, "which is in 11 days. Until then, I'm staying here." Victor looked at Ben. Ben looked back at him with the particular quality of a man who had nothing to be afraid of and knew it. "I'll be reporting this," Victor said. "That's fine," Ben said. "Report accurately." Victor left. The cars did not leave immediately. They repositioned at the end of the street, a clear message about ongoing surveillance. Ben closed the door. He turned around. Lily was standing in the middle of the workshop with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and something in her eyes that hadn't been there 2 weeks ago. Something that looked like the beginning of herself. "You okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. And then, with something that might have been wonder, "I've never said no to any of them before. How did it feel?" She thought about it. "Like sanding with the grain," she said. Ben almost smiled. "Yeah," he said. "That's about right." Diane's next move arrived not through Victor, but through the local police. A welfare check request filed through the county, citing concern for a minor in the care of an individual with no parental relationship to the child. 2 officers came. They were polite and clearly uncomfortable, which told Ben they already had some sense of the situation's shape. He answered every question directly. He showed them the workshop, the couch where Lily slept, the kitchen where he cooked. He explained clearly and without defensiveness exactly what had happened and exactly what he had and hadn't done. Lily spoke with the officers separately. She cited, again, the legal structure of her father's custody arrangement. She gave them the name of her father's personal attorney, a detail she had memorized before she ever left the estate, because Lily Mercer, quiet and observant as she was, had always been quietly prepared for the moment things broke. She also said, clearly and for the official record, "My stepmother removed me from my room and placed me in the staff quarters because she told me I had disappointed her. I left because I didn't feel safe. I am 15, and I am telling you, I did not feel safe in my own home." The officers filed their report. Diane's welfare check did not result in Lily being removed from Ben's workshop. What it did result in was a county social services follow-up flag on the Mercer estate, which was not what Diane had intended. Paul came over that evening and sat on the back porch with Ben while Lily was inside reading. "You understand this could get messy," Paul said. "Yes." "You're okay with that?" Ben looked out at the tree line. "She reminds me of something," he said. "What?" "The way my grandmother used to talk about her early life. Every time things were hard and someone helped her, they did it because it was right. Not because it was convenient. She said that was rare enough that she never forgot it." Paul was quiet for a moment. "So, you're doing it for your grandmother?" "No," Ben said. "I'm doing it because it's right. My grandmother just taught me to recognize that." Paul nodded. He picked up his coffee. "For what it's worth," he said, "if anyone comes for you over this, I'll stand in the way." "I know," Ben said. "That's why you're the best person I know. I also talk too much." Tragically, yes. Richard Mercer landed on a Tuesday. He had been traveling for 9 weeks. In that time, he had closed deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars, had shaken hands with ministers and CEOs, had slept in 4 countries and spoken in 3 languages, and navigated rooms where the pressure was real and the margins were thin. He landed, turned on his phone, and found 47 messages from Diane. Not about the deal, not about the house or the schedule, or any of the operational matters that Diane typically managed with precise efficiency. About Lily. He read the messages in the back of the car on the way from the airport. He read them in order, carefully, the way he read contracts, looking for the shape of the thing rather than just the individual sentences. By the time he finished, 2 things were clear. 1. His daughter had left the estate 11 days ago and had been living in a stranger's workshop. 2. The version of events in Diane's messages was so elaborately constructed, so carefully framed around words like concern and stability and appropriate intervention, that it read less like a worried wife's account and more like a prepared statement. Richard Mercer had spent 30 years reading prepared statements. He knew what they looked like. He told the driver to change the route. The address had been in the police report, which his attorney had forwarded as a matter of course. Millbrook wasn't far. An hour's drive through countryside that got gradually smaller and quieter as the city receded. The workshop appeared exactly as Lily had left it. Modest, warm, the lights on inside, a low sound of radio coming from within, a man's pickup truck in the drive, the smell of sawdust. Richard stood outside for a moment before going in. He was not a man given to visible emotion. He had the same quality his daughter had, the careful, observant steadiness of someone who processed before responding. But standing outside this small workshop in the late afternoon light, knowing his daughter was inside, knowing she had been here for 11 days while he was on the other side of the world making money, something moved in him that he couldn't contain in the usual way. He knocked. Ben opened the door. They looked at each other, 2 men who had never met, who occupied entirely different worlds, who had been connected for 11 days by a 15-year-old girl who had found her way to the right door by accident. "Mr. Hartley," Richard said. "Mr. Mercer," Ben said. "I'd like to see my daughter." "She'd like to see you," Ben said, and stepped back to let him in. Lily was at the workbench when her father came through the door. She had been sanding the second project she'd helped Ben with, a bookcase for Paul's hardware store that was almost finished. She was good at it now. Her movements were even and sure, the grain reading automatic. She looked up. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Richard crossed the workshop in 4 steps and put his arms around his daughter, and Lily, who had been holding herself together with precision and stubbornness for 11 days, stopped holding herself together. She let herself be held for the first time since she could remember. Ben stepped quietly to the other side of the workshop and began organizing a shelf of tools that didn't need organizing, giving them the privacy of his back turned. Richard held his daughter and didn't speak for a long time. When she finally pulled back, he looked at her. At the cut on her forearm, healed now but visible. At the circles under her eyes, also fading. At the dry hands and the sawdust on her sleeve. "Tell me everything," he said. She told him. She started with the schedule, the contact list, the monitoring application, the staff quarters. She told it plainly and in order, without dramatizing, The way she'd watched Ben answer the police officers directly, fully, without apology or embellishment. Richard listened the way someone listens when they are calculating two things simultaneously: what they are being told and the specific texture of their own failure to have already known it. He listened to all of it. Then he looked across the workshop at Ben. "She was safe here?" he said. "Yes," Ben said. "He didn't ask me anything," Lily said quietly. "He just helped." Richard stood up. He crossed the workshop and extended his hand. Ben shook it. "Thank you," Richard said. It was a simple sentence. It held a weight behind it that Ben suspected Richard Mercer was not always free with. "She sands well now," Ben said. "Took her about a day to get the feel for it." Richard looked at his daughter, who was standing by the workbench with sawdust on her sleeve, and something crossed his face that was not anything to do with money or power or prepared statements. It was the face of a man looking at his child and seeing her clearly, possibly for the first time in years. "Yeah," he said softly. "She's always been quick." What happened to Diane Mercer unfolded over the weeks that followed. Not dramatically, not all at once. The way these things actually happen in conversations and offices and documents, in the quiet language of legal processes, and the blunter language of consequences. Richard had gone home that evening. He had listened to Diane's version of events with the same careful attention he gave every statement, and he had cross-referenced it internally against Lily's account, against the police report, against the social services flag, and against the 47 messages on his phone, and the specific, deliberate way they had been framed. The discrepancies were not subtle. The monitoring application had logs. The contact list was a document with dates. The staff quarters reassignment was noted in the household management system that Diane had maintained with great care, because Diane maintained everything with great care, which meant the evidence of what she'd done was organized in her own files. Richard's attorney was good, better than Diane had anticipated, which had been her first miscalculation. She had assumed Richard's affection not for her, she was clear-eyed about that, but for the stability she represented would soften the process. It did not. The divorce was filed within a month. Diane did not fight it in any way that improved her position. She had built her case on the assumption that Richard was absent enough, distracted enough, structured enough around his professional world that she could manage the domestic narrative indefinitely. When that assumption proved wrong, when she found herself across a table from someone who had read her files more thoroughly than she had, the composure that had always been her greatest asset became simply the mask it had always been. Victor was let go. The monitoring application was removed. The contact list was deleted. The estate on the hill, that large, managed, precisely organized world, was very quiet for a while. Richard asked Ben to build something for him. Not as payment, not as a transaction. He had made some attempts at direct payment, and Ben had declined in the polite, final way of someone who has considered the matter and closed it. What Richard eventually asked for was a commission, a proper professional commission at proper professional rates, for a piece of furniture of Ben's own choosing. Ben built a dining table. He built it from walnut dark grain, warm finish, solid enough to last 3 generations. He built it with the same patience and precision he brought to everything, and he built it with a detail he didn't mention to anyone. The joinery at the center of the table used a technique Lily had asked about during her second week in the workshop. She had looked at a photograph in one of his reference books and said, "That's beautiful. What makes it hold?" And he had explained the mechanics of it, and she had listened with the full attention she gave to things that genuinely interested her. The table was the kind of thing a family used, not displayed, used. Richard paid for it, shook Ben's hand, and told him there was ongoing work available if he wanted it, not from charity, from legitimate need. A man with several properties and a preference for furniture that was made by someone who cared how it lasted. Ben said he'd think about it. He did. He said yes. Lily came back to the workshop on a Saturday, 3 months after everything. She came in her own car new license, just passed the test, which she mentioned with a satisfaction so genuine it was almost funny. She brought pastries from a bakery in the city. Paul was there. because Paul was usually there. He greeted her like someone he'd known for years, which, in the accounting that actually mattered, he had. They ate pastries on the back porch. "How's school?" Ben asked. "Different," she said. "Better. I'm studying architecture. Apparently I have a feel for how things fit together." She said this with a sideways look at the workshop. "Sanding teaches that," Ben said. "So does good company," she said. Paul pointed at himself. "Both of you," she said, which made Paul say, "obviously," and Ben look at the tree line with the expression that people who knew him recognized as the closest he got to beaming. Richard had called Ben twice in the preceding months, not about furniture, about Lily updates, shared with the particular careful gratitude of a man who is still learning how to ask for things he should have asked for sooner. Ben had listened and given his thoughts when asked, and kept the calls to the point, which Richard appeared to appreciate in the way that busy people appreciate someone who doesn't waste their time. On the second call, Richard had said, almost offhandedly, "She talks about you like you taught her something important." "She taught herself," Ben said. "I just had the wood." Richard was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll pass that along." "Don't," Ben said. "She knows." On a Sunday in October, exactly a year after Lily had appeared at his door with no shoes, Ben sat on the back porch in the early morning watching the light come through the tree line. Paul arrived at 8 with coffee from the shop on Main Street because he had developed the habit and had no intention of breaking it. They sat for a while without talking, which was their most reliable mode of friendship. Eventually Paul said, "You think you made the right call, that first night?" Ben thought about it the way he thought about everything that actually mattered. He thought about the girl at the door with no shoes, about the chamomile tea, about the first afternoon of sanding, and the moment she stopped fighting the grain and started listening to it. About a father who had gotten lost in the business of being powerful and come home to find his daughter in a carpenter's workshop, sawdust on her sleeve, steadier than she'd been in years. He thought about the table he had built, the joinery in the center, the way the right things hold. "Yeah," he said, "I do." Paul nodded, looked at his coffee. "What would you have done differently?" Ben considered it. "Nothing," he said. "You don't get to choose when the right moment arrives. You only get to choose whether you show up for it." Paul raised his cup slightly in a toast to that. Ben raised his back. And that was the year a carpenter with calloused hands and nothing to prove became the hinge point of 4 lives, including his own, simply by being willing to open his door. Here's the question I'm leaving you with tonight. Ben had everything to lose and nothing connecting him to that girl, except the fact that she needed help. He helped anyway. But be honest, if someone showed up at your door at 11 at night with no shoes and no explanation, would you do what he did? Or would you call someone else and let the system handle it? There's no wrong answer. I just want the real one. Drop it in the comments and tell me where in the world you're watching from. I check every single one. If this story got you, share it with someone. And if you're still not subscribed, you've been here 20 minutes, you clearly like it here. The button's right there. See you in the next one.